Another offseason and another year of wide receivers, players for the 49ers, contract negotiations, and social media posts that get over-examined. Today, no different. Brandon Aiyuk says, they don't want me back. Do the 49ers really not want Brandon Aiyuk back? Coming up right now, Locked On 49ers.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On 49ers. Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker at BD Peacock at Crocky209. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We love our everydayers, and we especially love it when you hit that subscribe button, the notification bell on YouTube, the thumbs up. If you're enjoying the pod, let us know. You can also drop a comment on YouTube. And, of course, you can subscribe everywhere you are listening to this audio podcast. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. And right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. All right, Croc. I guess we have to speak on the latest with Brandon Aiyuk. The latest being that Brandon Aiyuk himself posted on Instagram a video of himself saying, quote, "They don't want me back, I swear." He was speaking on a FaceTime phone call with his old buddy, his former teammate at Arizona State University, now NFL quarterback for the Washington Commanders. Jaden Daniels was the guy on the other end of the phone call. And Croc, when you hear Brandon Aiyuk say, "They don't want me back, I swear," what do you think that means? Is he even talking about the 49ers? Could the 49ers really not want Brandon Aiyuk back?
I don't see a scenario where the 49ers just flat out don't want Brandon Aiyuk back. So I'm hoping that there's a lot of missing context here. It's a short clip, I don't know, 30 seconds or so, where he's clearly on FaceTime with Jaden Daniels. His significant other is recording it with her like video camera. She's kind of vlogging the whole thing. And it came off as someone a little bit more joking. And maybe he was kind of just exacerbating the situation. But I just don't see a scenario where the 49ers are like, we don't want Aiyuk back, especially because of just the player he is. Forget the stats aside. The kind of player that he has become under Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers, and what his attitude brings to the team and to the offense, I can't see them just saying, we don't want that around anymore.
He didn't seem too upset about it. If we're on a worried meter for Brandon Aiyuk and how negotiations are going right now, it'd probably be at about a 3 out of 10, right? I don't think this changes really anything. We've seen the 49ers do a lot of deals. None of them got done by June 17th as we record this right now. Not Warner, not Kittle, not Debo, not Bosa. None of those deals were signed by June 17th in those off seasons. I gotta stop for a second. Something I didn't plan on talking about, because you just brought up something really interesting, Croc. If I'm not mistaken, Eric Crocker is the guy who keeps telling us about how the 49ers don't value Brandon Aiyuk because they don't target him as much. They don't force the ball into his hands. They don't find ways to get the ball into his hands. But then he says now that there's no way they couldn't possibly not want him back, Croc. How do you justify those two takes at the same time?
A little contradicting there, but I do think they love Brandon Aiyuk, the player. I don't know if they value him enough at the dollar amount that he is potentially demanding, with whatever that is. I mean, we hear numbers thrown out. I don't know how true what is what from the reports, but clearly if the number is out there, I think the 49ers are throwing out there, we've offered him $26 million a year, right? Like that's them saying, hey, if he doesn't sign this, you guys can't blame us, faithful. You got to look at this guy. So clearly there's a number out there. He values himself more than that. I think that aspect of it is, dude, we don't want to go north of $26 million a year.
Yeah.
But I think they do, like, if you take money away, they love the player. They love the person. But when it comes to Kyle Shanahan running his offense, Does he want to structure his offense around that player? I'd say no.
Right. And when it comes to Kyle Shanahan not even being in the room when they're negotiating this thing, it's there's lawyers involved and there's agents involved and there's Prague and John Lynch, and so there's a lot of people involved that aren't Kyle Shanahan and Brandon Aiyuk in this negotiation. And then Brandon Aiyuk and Kyle Shanahan just get reports about what the other guys got in the room and talked about. And so that's part of it too. And then we get the report from the Instagram of Brandon Aiyuk after he got the report from what his agent said from the room he was actually in or the call he was on about it. So, it's a big game of telephone as well. And you can see how things can get misconstrued and different ideas about that. And, but the numbers we're throwing out there, according to different reports and, based on what numbers the contracts have been for other wide receivers this offseason, I think it's pretty fair that the 49ers probably have offered somewhere around $26 million per year to Brandon Aiyuk, give or take. And that Brandon Aiyuk's probably asking for somewhere around $30 million per year, give or take. And there's a little bit of a gap there. So there's multiple angles of this. The first angle is we go through this every offseason. I mentioned all the names, the guys that weren't signed yet on June 17th. We saw the social media stuff with Deebo Samuel a couple years ago. This is not new. This is not like, I remember going through this last year and the year before, Croc, and saying the same thing. Don't hate the player, hate the game. And by that, I mean, and this is for everybody. This is for the fans and the listeners of this show. Don't hate Brandon Aiyuk. Don't hate the 49ers. They're trying to do right by what their objective is, and they're negotiating. And that's what this is. So that's the game. Don't hate the team or the player for where they're at. Hate them if something crazy happens, right? But nothing crazy has happened yet. This isn't even off the rails. This isn't even remotely out of the ordinary right now. And we've been through this. So, it's hard because I think fans, I think media in a lot of cases, maybe including us, Croc, I think sometimes the player himself, it's hard. Yeah, when you see how the sausage is made, I think it's best for everybody if this stuff wasn't public at all. And I think that's why the 49ers like things to not be public when they're negotiating a contract. It's much better to let the agent and the team work this out in private, and then the player hears about what the offer is and then goes, because if you get too personally invested, fans get upset, the player gets upset, and so you start to get a lot of people that get a lot of feelings and emotions about something that they probably shouldn't have, because I don't think we're meant to know every step of this throughout, right? But with social media, we get a lot more now than we ever did when it comes to negotiations. So I want to remind everybody, this is not out of the ordinary. Don't hate the player, hate the game. I do have a little bit of a problem with Brandon Aiyuk. I don't have a problem with it. The social media stuff is what it is. Klay Thompson took the Warriors off of his. So, by the way, Klay Thompson, he's 35 years old. Yeah, I think he's 34, 35 years old. I think it'll be his age 35 season next year. So we're playing the Instagram game. We're playing the who's following who game. 35 years old. I thought Klay Thompson might be beyond that. But I think part of it is when players, and Justin Fields did that with the Bears this offseason, he just didn't. It's like you don't want to follow your ex-girlfriend on Instagram, right? See all the things she's doing. You just don't want to see that. And so I think, with Klay Thompson and with Justin Fields earlier this offseason, they stopped following the team. And it's like they just don't want to see it. It's just something they don't want to keep seeing on their feed, right? And I could see how that would, just get. He's like, I don't want to deal with this right now, but I'm going to take it off of there because I just don't want to see it. I don't want to deal with it.
Yeah, I get it. I get it, right? But I feel like an ex-girlfriend is a lot different than like business and a big chapter of your life, in the sense of why we know who Klay Thompson is. It's removing the Warriors and all the good things, all the good memories. Like you'll have fans for life because of your years, your terrific years, your championship runs with that squad. So I think at this point in your career, to remove the Golden State Warriors, that is a little petty. That is a little petty.
It feels a little childish. Like you're playing the Instagram game. That's like, I feel like what kids do, young guys in their early 20s maybe still doing it. And that still doesn't feel right. Like you're a professional playing the social media game. I mean, I know it is what it is. And, folks that are younger than me might feel different about it, the way they came up versus the way I came up. But, some of it just feels kind of silly. There is one aspect of it beyond just being pure social media that I do start to have a little bit of a problem with from Brandon Aiyuk's side. Unless, Croc, the 49ers are actually saying, we don't want you back, which I don't think is remotely happening at all. And I'll tell you why the 49ers are not saying that next. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers is brought to you by FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. And when it comes to FanDuel Sportsbook, we're talking NBA Finals. You can bet on it. WNBA, yep. NBA Draft, of course. Major League Baseball Draft. Major League Baseball every single day, all summer long. NHL. We got Euro Soccer. We got tennis, UFC, everything you can imagine. And yes, including NFL football. So many NFL football futures you can bet on right now at FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. And for new customers at FanDuel, get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet on everything, including Major League Baseball every single day. Who's going to hit one out of the park that day? All you got to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. That is FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. All right, Croc. I do think it starts to get for your average fan. You're a 49er fan. You maybe get to 1 or 2 games a year. And when you go to that game, you're spending $1,000, $2,000. You're buying $13 beers. You're buying a $200 jersey, right, for you or your kid or something like that, taking the family to go see a football game. And for Brandon Aiyuk to say, they don't want me back, I swear, at a $26 million per year offer, I do think it's at a certain point it's a little disrespectful to the everyday fan. And I could see why some fans do get turned off by some of that stuff. And I do remind everybody, look, we've been through this. Some things get personal, team and player and contract negotiations. You don't want to see how the sausage is made. Don't hate the player, hate the game. But still, I could see, and I've seen it on my timeline today, even though I reminded everybody, look, we've been through this. No, not a big deal. It's just one of the things that happens. But I could see why your average fan might look at this and be like, Brandon, shut up. $26 million, you're saying they don't want you back? Come on, dude.
I was listening to XM radio today, just riding around Sirius XM radio, and there's a show with Robert Turbin on it. And he's a former Seattle Seahawk, but he has a radio show. And I'm listening to him kind of break down the situation, and he kind of mentioned T. Higgins, but I think his thoughts align with what I've been saying. He talked about, he brought up Jalen Waddle, and he was like, if you take Jalen Waddle out of that offense, Miami is not as good. He said, and he mentioned someone else, like, if you take this player out of that offense, that team is not as good. And he got to the 49ers with Aiyuk, and he said, if you take Aiyuk out of the offense and just replace him with Pearsall, because of everyone around, that offense is still good. Like, it's still the 49ers. And he said that's the conversation he believes is happening in the 49ers headquarters.
And why they might be less willing to move up to a $30 million number. I don't think, though, the idea that they don't want him back, I think, is absolutely false. And the reason is, unless something has massively changed over the course of the last month, Croc, they had a chance before the NFL draft, during the NFL draft, to trade Brandon Aiyuk. And if you didn't want him, you traded him during the draft. So the fact that they didn't means they still want Brandon Aiyuk, right? Unless there's the possibility, we've had the reports that it's, they've offered around $26 million. Maybe they haven't. Is it a possibility they just haven't offered that? And they're like, nope, we're not cool. We're not interested in a long-term deal, Brandon. We want you to play on the 5th-year option. We'll talk about it next offseason again. Do you think that's even remotely possible? Or maybe the fact that they're so far apart, that is kind of they don't want me back, being that it's, first of all, they obviously want him back for this year, but maybe they don't want him back after that, is what he's trying to say, that the Niners are a little too cool with him playing on the 5th-year option and not doing a deal this summer.
Now, you know what I think it could be? 26 million might be the number that they've thrown out there. And 26 million might be the number that the 49er front office wants the fans to hear about. But what we haven't heard is about guaranteed numbers. And with these players, you can say 26 million a year, 4-year contract, whatever it is, right? Hey man, you'll be making over $100 million. But if his guarantees are significantly lower than the other guys that are signing right now, it could be looked at as a slap in the face, because it goes from what would be a 4-year, $100+ million contract to a 2-year contract where he would make good money over the 2 years and then not have much long-term insurance after that. And when people say that, oh, they're far apart, it doesn't have to just be the amount per year. The guaranteed number, that's the most important number. That's more important than anything else. And if you're far apart on that, because now once you're under contract and you don't have a lot of guarantees, that's when they start doing all the little funny business with your contract negotiation, moving money, doing this, doing that. And at some point, your hands might be tied. I mean, why did Christian McCaffrey get a new contract? Of course, he's been terrific. Of course, he needed a bump in money. He didn't have any more guarantee left. Like, there was no guarantee. Why are we talking about next year Deebo Samuel is disposable? Because there's no more guarantees left. So they can also be far apart on that. And a big part of it might just be what the other guys are getting right now, which, I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown, the contract he signed, if you want the per year, I get it because it looks great on paper. But I bet the other aspects of it, a lot of people probably ain't taking that for real. And I think Brandon Aiyuk may be looking at how the 49ers may be trying to structure their contract. He doesn't want it to be, I say him and his agent. They don't want it to be something where, oh man, Brandon Aiyuk, $27 million a year. Oh, that's awesome. And then Brian Peacock says, well, let's wait on the details of the contract. Then the contract comes out and it's like, this is really a 2-year contract. Richard Sherman talked about this years ago when he structured his own contract with the 49ers. He's like, well, everybody's getting on me for this contract that I signed, which he ended up making a lot of money for the 49ers. I think he made all of the money he was capable of making. So everybody's getting on me with how I've structured my contract. But nobody ever says anything to these agents who have their players sign these 3-year contracts that are really 1-year contracts, and it just looks great on paper. And when people say, again, saying they're far apart, that could be a big aspect to it.
No doubt, a 4-year contract can become a 2-year contract real quick if there's not a lot of guarantees deep into a contract. Amon-Ra St. Brown, by the way, fully guaranteed money that he 100% will get at the date of signing when he signed his contract was only $34.7 million. So Amon-Ra St. Brown, as far as what percentage of his overall contract was guaranteed, was a pretty small amount. Devontae Smith's contract he signed a week earlier, April 15th, only $34 million only 34 million total were fully guaranteed. Now there's other guaranteed money that can kick in later in a contract, but at signing the fully 100% guaranteed dollars, they were actually pretty low. Devontae Smith just barely over Nico Collins. Nico Collins was 32.1. Devontae was 34 million, and Amon-Ra St. Brown $34.7 million on those 3 deals. Jalen Waddle a little bit more, 35.9. So if Aiyuk got $40 million guaranteed to be ahead of all those guys, and that's only that's only the first couple of years. That's less than the first 2 years of the contract guaranteed.
Yeah, it's got to be less than 2 years because, I mean, one, you're going to get a signing bonus. That's part of your guarantees.
Yep.
And then you get your, like, that first year. You might be out of guarantees after you finish your first year.
And for all those contracts, there's probably a lot more guarantees that they're pretty much going to get, because how many of those guys are going to get cut after their first year and you paid them $35 million for 1 year? So that second year roster bonus or whatever that kicks in, that's probably going to get kicked into. So those guarantees do start to grow. But guarantees is another aspect of it that we don't really talk about. We talk so much about, okay, what's the total dollars in the years? What's the per year average? And we don't really talk a lot about the guarantees, and the guarantees is part of it as well. Bottom line is the Niners do want Brandon Aiyuk back. They've made offers. Are they far apart? Sure. How far apart are they? I have no idea. Brandon Aiyuk doesn't seem too upset about it. In fact, Brandon Aiyuk seems less upset about it than Deebo Samuel, but he's still putting some stuff out there, right? And obviously,
I think he's having fun with it. Deebo was clearly upset.
Yeah, he was.
Deebo was in the club, and they're bringing out the little sparkler things with the sign like "Pay Deebo," and Deebo was like, "Nah."
I think so. Deebo later didn't Deebo actually say that when he said no, he was saying no, don't bring us the bottle of booze. He wasn't saying no to what the sign said, but it looked like he was like, I ain't coming back.
Nobody has ever in club been like, nah, don't bring us this bottle that somebody sent, because I think it was someone was sending it over to him.
Yeah.
It's like, oh no, my section doesn't want alcohol. Like, what? Nah, man, I ain't believing that. I've been in enough clubs, man. One game, I had a game. We went out at night. I was in Arizona. We're at this club, and this guy just keeps buying bottles and bottles. I'm like, who is this guy buying all these bottles? It was Tyrann Mathieu, and he maybe wasn't even drinking, but some people in this section were. So to turn down bottles, highly doubt it.
I love that. I love the story about how your teammate gave you extra cash to go spend.
He didn't give me cash to spend. He gave me cash to throw.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
$1 bill. That's fantastic. That's a good teammate right there.
Yeah, shout out to my guy Royce Adams.
All right, I didn't know if you want to say who it was. All right.
Oh, he good. Everybody, hey, the strip club is part of the culture a little bit in the league. Not my culture. I don't believe in just throwing away money, but a lot of guys, they want to have a good time.
Yeah, you're like not even drinking. Let's throw some money at this thing. Behind the red.
I will say, very unique club. There's a very unique establishment there that these girls were doing tricks I've never seen before.
Oh, like just physical maneuvers you hadn't seen?
Never seen it. I mean, I've seen people spin down the pole. Never seen people spin up the pole. Like, that is unique. Okay, let me throw a little bit there.
Defying gravity. By the way, dude, table service, bottle service is the worst, is the biggest scams, the worst deal in food and beverage history. Like, you're going to pay exorbitant amount of money for you to have to make your own drink, and they'll bring you like some cranberry juice or something. It's like, dude, there's a bartender that is professionally trained to make the great beverages, yet you're going to sit there and pay even more and have to make the crap yourself and do a worse job making it? That makes no sense to me. I'd never understood that.
No, my trick was always drink a Four Loko before you go out. There's going to be about a 20-minute period where your stomach hurts. You have to get past the part where your stomach hurts. And then once you finish the Four Loko, like, you'll be feeling good. Then you go in, maybe you get a drink in there, and then that's it. You're good for the night. You're feeling good. I'm surprised I didn't die from all the Four Lokos I drank during that era. But
didn't they? Because it was so bad for you.
Yeah, they're back. They changed them a little bit, but they are back.
They had to change up that formula a little bit. All right. Next, I want to talk about potentially, who knows, maybe Brandon Aiyuk, maybe Deebo Samuel's replacement at wide receiver. Ricky Pearsall, Jacob Cowing, how the profile for these rookie wide receivers may be different. Is it a little bit different from the 49ers' 2-star wide receivers next? A-dot versus rack yards per reception, run after catch, yards after catch. Ricky Pearsall and Jacob Cowing. Are they yak bros, Croc? By the way, according to PFF, we talked a little bit about this off the air. Brandon Aiyuk, number 1 in the NFL last year, highest graded wide receiver according to PFF on out routes and post routes in the league in 2023. Deebo Samuel, the highest graded wide receiver on in routes in 2023. So Brandon Aiyuk in the entire league, highest graded wide receiver on out and posts. Deebo Samuel, highest graded wide receiver in the league on in routes in 2023. So
we do know that
how those guys work together.
We do know that the 49ers don't throw the ball a ton. I wonder if the efficiency, along with obviously a quarterback being super efficient, but the efficiency for them is much higher because they're maybe not doing it as much as other people. Like, is Deebo the highest graded, or Aiyuk the highest graded on post routes, but he only ran 5, but he got 3 of them.
I was surprised because I've seen Aiyuk get hit on so many of those dig routes, and I assume the dig route is part of the in route category. Maybe not, because that's more basic in than dig, maybe, that they're talking about there. I'm just going off their social media posts on those two things. But Debo obviously is a huge yak guy, a lot of in-breaking stuff. But the posts, I know Aiyuk's hit some big ones, but yeah, it's not like a high volume thing. It's not like Brandon Aiyuk was getting hit on posts all day, every week last year. So there might be, especially on that one specific route, some sample size stuff. But by the way, why Debo's so good? The yak yards. Do you remember back in the 2019 draft? And I think you and I talked about it. I talked a lot about it. I used to call Debo Samuel slant god when he was coming out of college. He averaged 30 yards per catch. Averaged 30 yards per catch on slant routes in college. It was crazy. I'm going to bring a graphic up on the screen. And this is college production. 49ers wide receiver draft picks under the Kyle Shanahan era since 2017 for the 49ers. And average depth of target, ADOT, average depth of target, and yards after the catch per reception. So yak per reception and ADOT. And I find it fascinating that Brandon Aiyuk and Debo Samuel very similar coming out of college. Debo Samuel was 9.1 average depth of target, pretty low in college. He's stayed pretty low in the NFL on his average depth of target. And Brandon Aiyuk just a little higher, 10.6 average depth of target coming out of Arizona State in 2020. Both big yak guys, and I'm surprised actually that Brandon Aiyuk's yards after the catch per reception, 9.9, even higher than Debo's, and in fact, the highest of all the wide receivers the 49ers have drafted since 2019. Debo Samuel third, 8.4 yards after the catch per reception in college.
Real quick, I think that the reasoning for Brandon Aiyuk having more yards yards after catch per reception could be because Debo a lot of times is catching it at the line of scrimmage and then has to do all of his work from there.
More runaway routes from Brandon Aiyuk, catching and going the distance.
Yeah,
right?
Catching in space as opposed to Debo. It's like catch, you got to make some guys miss, and there's times where he maybe only gets 1 yard.
Yeah, you have 0 or 1. Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And which is why the surprising one to me on this list, we'll get to the rookie draft picks in a second and who the closest comparison is, the 49er draft picks, which some folks who are watching on YouTube already see it up there on the screen, and some folks listening haven't heard the name yet. But Danny Gray is actually right there in between Brandon Aiyuk and Debo Samuel in ADOT and yards after the catch per reception, which I was a little bit surprised at. But why he's up there, similarly what you were talking about with Brandon Aiyuk, a lot of catch a post and you're gone down the field. So you get a big chunks on smaller amount of plays rather than Debo, who's averaging more per actual play run after the catch. So I was surprised to see Danny Gray right in between Brandon Aiyuk and Debo Samuel because of how good those two guys are. So you can't take these two stats as meaning everything because there is Danny Gray sandwiched right in between Brandon Aiyuk and Debo Samuel in that sweet spot for what they've been so good at in the NFL. And actually, Debo Samuel's yards after the catch have played up in the NFL, unlike Brandon Aiyuk, who we both thought was going to be a better yards after catch receiver in the NFL, and he hasn't quite been that. He's been okay, but he hasn't been as good as we thought he was coming out of college.
Yeah, I think with Debo Samuel specifically, I'm surprised that it has gone up more because I remember watching him. She was against Clemson. I feel like he had 300 yards receiving in that game. I mean, just catching the ball, outrunning guys. Tough to tackle, tough to bring down. Like there were a lot of those opportunities. Excuse me. I also watched a lot of Brandon Aiyuk at Arizona State. You talked about him, talking to Jaden Daniels on the phone. Jaden Daniels. I remember watching Jaden Daniels, watching Brandon Aiyuk, and thinking like, man, I think Aiyuk would be even more productive if his quarterback was a little bit more seasoned. And at that time, Jaden Daniels was a true freshman throwing to senior Brandon Aiyuk. There were some explosive plays down the field. Had a big game-clinching touchdown, caught a bomb on the left side against University of Oregon, beating current teammate Diamador Lenore. And that had to be an 80-yard touchdown where like 50 of it was yards after catch. So you had a lot of those kind of opportunities for Brandon Aiyuk throughout that first year. Not a whole lot of really quick timing type stuff.
So probably fans of this podcast are not going to like hearing that Ricky Pearsall and Jacob Cowing, their closest comparison to 49ers draft picks as far as ADOT and yards after the catch per reception go, is none other than Dante Pettis. Dante Pettis, the highest average depth of target of any receiver the 49ers have drafted coming out of college, 12.7 yards, and the lowest yards after the catch per reception of all the wide receivers. So the extremes of both. Dante Pettis, highest average depth of target, 12.7, and the lowest yak per reception, only 3.9. Next on the list is Ricky Pearsall, the second highest ADOT and the second lowest yards after catch per reception. So when people say that Ricky Pearsall, kind of a slimmer wide receiver, a little over 6 feet tall, is a comp to Dante Pettis, a lot of people talked about that after the draft. You can see why. There's a lot of reasons why there are some comparisons between them. There's one huge reason why there is no comparison between them, and I think that's the toughness aspect. I have questioned Ricky Pearsall's play strength, but not his actual toughness. He's a pretty tough guy, make catches in traffic. Dante Pettis is the biggest thing that hurt him in his NFL career. But Ricky Pearsall, and then Jacob Cowing's the next. Jacob Cowing has the third highest average depth of target in college and the third lowest yards after catch per reception of any of the 49ers draft picks at wide receiver since Kyle Shanahan. So Cowing and Pearsall kind of profile closer to Dante Pettis than they do to Brandon Aiyuk and Deebo Samuel.
What do you make of this?
Guys, doesn't matter at all.
If you're not able to see the graphic because you're listening to audio version, after Cowing, you have Ronnie Bell, you have Juwan Jennings, and those are, I don't know, that makes it interesting. Those first, what is that? 5 guys, 6 guys, first 5 guys that's at the top of this list here with the highest average depth of target, but lower yards after catch. Does that make you kind of question a little bit the Pearsall and Cowing picks, or maybe just question or be curious about what their usage will be at the NFL level?
I think it's just interesting. When I saw it, mostly it was interesting. It was like, wait a second, Pearsall and Cowing are really close to Dante Pettis on this list. Let's examine this a little bit more, right? The successful Kyle Shanahan wide receivers have been good after the catch. Deebo, Aiyuk, Juwan Jennings, 7 yards after the catch. There's, a lot of tape of him running a lot after the catch. There was not a lot of great tape of Ricky Pearsall making a lot of plays after the catch, So he's not a yak bro, I don't think. If that's the question you're trying to ask, I don't think Ricky Pearsall is. Ricky Pearsall's a get open and catch the ball guy. His separation and his pure hands are good. He can track the ball well. He's not an after the catch guy. So that doesn't mean that he's not a starting receiver, not a good fit for the 49ers offense. It's just going to be a little bit different. And when you start to look down the road at what this 49ers team is going to look like, maybe they are planning on featuring a drop back passing game a little bit more and less of the catch and run stuff. And whether it's Aiyuk or Deebo that goes eventually, most likely it's Deebo. Ricky Pearsall might play the Z, but he's not going to play the Deebo role. And then that's where, Christian McCaffrey comes in my opinion, as the wide back.
Well, and he can play a Deebo role, but it will not look like Deebo. And I think that's the part right there. Like Deebo with the ball in his hands, he somehow, some way just does special things. I think with Pearsall, maybe like we saw early on with Brandon Aiyuk, right? Like in the absence of Deebo Samuel, maybe a little bit more screens to Brandon Aiyuk. We saw the end around for a touchdown. Matter of fact, his first touchdown might have been the end around against the New York Giants, right? So we saw some of that kind of usage with Deebo not in there. And I think Pearsall can potentially kind of look a little bit more like Aiyuk doing those things as opposed to Deebo. But I do think there's still a place in the offense with Pearsall being able to be used that way. It just may not be special or game-changing the way that it is for Deebo Samuel.
In the end, I think Ricky Pearsall reminds me most of Trent Taylor, of all the wide receivers the 49ers have drafted. because I think where he will excel, especially as a rookie, I think he'll excel as a slot guy, getting open, third downs, and maybe that's it kind of thing. And potentially a bigger role. He's faster than Trent Taylor was, but Trent Taylor was awesome at getting open underneath. I think there's more routes. There's the bigger route tree open for Ricky Pearsall than there was for Trent Taylor. But, Taylor had a lot of toughness, made a lot of catches over the middle of the field, and he got banged up because of it. He was a little guy playing in the trees. Pearsall's a little taller, a little faster than Trent Taylor, but I think winning in that middle of the field area, getting open on third downs, I think that's where Ricky Pearsall is clearly going to excel in the 49ers offense, but he's not going to be a yak bro. So it might start looking a little bit different post Deebo Samuel. That's all I'm saying.
I like the Trent Taylor kind of comparison, because if Trent Taylor was 4 inches taller and instead of running into 4.5s, ran 4.41, combined with his production, he probably would have been a first round pick.
And Kendrick Bourne is a guy who's not on this list because he wasn't drafted. I think Kendrick Bourne's kind of a faster Kendrick Bourne maybe is a good comp for what Ricky Pearsall would be in the 49ers offense too.
Which is potentially a really good receiver.
Right. Kendrick Bourne was Juwan Jennings' third and Juwan before Juwan Jennings had that role, right? Getting open on third downs, he could get open. And the one thing he lacked was speed. He also wasn't good after the catch.
Right. He was a good possession receiver, did a good job of creating that short area separation. He was the 49ers' best contested catch / red zone guy throughout his time with the 49ers. But yeah, didn't quite have that speed that you ideally would like to see. Showed up. He was able to have some more explosive plays with the New England Patriots, and he's done a great job being an undrafted guy, ran in the 4.7s. He's made a terrific career for himself. But yeah, if he ran faster, we are talking about somebody maybe the 49ers potentially keep a long time, because you just see a different level of ability / production for the 49ers.
And by the way, if anybody wants to see that graph that we've referenced here, you can go to my timeline. I retweeted it. It was put out there by Football Insights. It's a good handle on Twitter. It's a good account that gives a lot of good football information out there. And you can find it at BD Peacock on my timeline. I retweeted it. And interesting. Just interesting stuff about the 49ers wide receivers, what they like, what they don't like. I think they definitely, it's all about the tape, and they just see a guy who got open and made catches in Ricky Pearsall. It's the number one important thing. Just because he's right next to Dante Pettis on that graph does not mean that he is the next Dante Pettis, but there are some similarities, and there are some reasons why the 49ers liked Dante Pettis, traded up to get him. If Dante Pettis was a tougher football player, he might be the guy that we're talking about getting $26 million per year this offseason. Croc's doubtful.
I think that we're running out of time here.
Yeah, we're out of time.
The margin between something that you want / need on your team and something that you can do away with is typically a lot smaller than I think people realize. And I threw out there yesterday Jimmy Garoppolo and how good he was for the 49ers. And even with how good and efficient he was, you just get a notch better, and boom, you have Brock Purdy, who's potential MVP. And I felt like during that time, like, man, if Jimmy was just a notch better, he probably would have been up for MVP, like depending on the season. And so you talk about some of these receivers and Pettis, and I think when we were, weren't recording last night, we talked about Pettis a little bit. Pettis showed you a lot of what you wanted to see from your receivers. I mean, destroying guys off the line. He had releases for days. He could run really good routes. He could stretch the field. I could remember that 80 or 75-yard touchdown catch like it was yesterday against the Seattle Seahawks. I mean, he just destroyed that team. So you really saw this ability, but he was lacking something that made it from going to where he could potentially be a $26 million guy in this offense to where, are you even on an NFL team right now?
Yep.
And that's how small the margin is. Heck, Eric Crocker, just lacking something, especially on special teams, that made it to where you could be a 6-year special teamer in the NFL, maybe end up somehow weaseling your way into having a few starts to just being cut because this one aspect of your game you probably just lack a little too much.
Yeah.
And it's the separation is not much. And you see drastic variations of it.
You get a notch better, you're a long-term starter in the NFL. You get a notch worse, and you're not in the NFL. Like, that's how close it is. We saw it with Jimmy Garoppolo. Like, we always talk about Brock Purdy. Like, look, what if Jimmy Garoppolo was a more aggressive, more healthy, made a little bit more plays out of structure, out of the pocket, right? Made a few more plays. That'd be a pretty awesome quarterback. Fewer interceptions, fewer turnover-worthy plays. Jimmy Garoppolo is all those things. That'd be a pretty good quarterback. Well, that's exactly what Brock Purdy is, right? Or if Jimmy Garoppolo gets a little bit worse, now we're sick of watching Jimmy Garoppolo. We need a different quarterback in here. And Jimmy Garoppolo, now is bounced around to his third team post Niners. And so, it's the margins are thin. Margins are thin. That's why so many draft picks miss. All right. Thanks, everybody, for making this your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Croc and I back tomorrow. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts. Talk to you then right here, Locked On 49ers.